Well, hello and welcome to everyone who's joining us today. Welcome to the webinar series titled Doing Academia Differently in Conversation with Neuroatypicality. This is a webinar series that follows on from a previous one. We had 14 webinars in a series titled Post-Philosophies and the Doing of Inquiry. And this new webinar series is a partnership between 3 universities. So Geert Van Hove from Ghent University, Vivienne Bozalek from the University of the Western Cape, and myself, Candace Kuby from the University of Missouri. We're so glad that you're here and joining us today. We also have Nikki Romano with us. Nikki is a support person, the go-to person, the artist, the technical support, kind of the expert on everything to keep this webinar series running. And we're so grateful to have Nikki with us today as well. So each session in this webinar series involves 1 or 2 international guests who have some experience with neuroatypicality in the context of higher education. So we are very grateful to our universities who have made it possible for the research collaborative partnership between our 3 universities. The partnership between the University of Missouri and the University of Western Cape started in 1986. And the University of Western Cape and the University of Ghent have had a partnership for more than 20 years. The Tricontinental or 3C partnership is a trilateral agreement that was set up to promote a partnership between our 3 institutions during a time of travel restrictions due to the global pandemic that we still find ourselves in. The funds were provided to support virtual research and teaching collaborations between faculty members at our 3 institutions. We are so grateful for our university's longtime collaboration and specifically the support of this webinar series. These webinars are also available on YouTube. You can find them on our website and it will take you or give you a link to take you to the YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel to get updates as new ones are released. Also on YouTube, you can select an option for closed captioning to see a written transcript of the webinar. And as always, we encourage you to check the webinar website. We have updated the times for each webinar. We just in Missouri went to daylight savings time. I think the European daylight savings time is happening soon as well. And so we've tried to update the webinar to have exact times for each of the webinars because they are changing throughout the year. And also there is a Zoom link for each of our webinars on our website as well. So be sure to check that out for our next one. So today we are so excited to have Dr. Tanya Titchkosky, who's a professor in social justice education at the University of Toronto. Tanya, would you like to unmute and say a brief hello before we go further with introductions?
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here and have a chance to share our conversation together. I go by Tanya.
Tanya. So I believe Viv is going to continue with some introductions as we begin our webinar today.
Thanks, Candace. I'll just unmute quickly. I wanted to just introduce Nikki Romano. Nikki is at the moment a PhD student at the University of the Western Cape and at Utrecht University. It's a joint degree. And by the time we meet again, she will at least have defended her thesis at Utrecht University. That will be in April. Nikki is also, and then she'll go to her graduation at UWC in September. Nikki's a lecturer in art history at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. She's also an artist and she's been an art educator for quite some time across a variety of fields. And as Candace said, Nikki's going to be providing technical support today on the webinar platform. And she's also going to be assisting and moderating the Q&A session, which happens at the end of the webinar, which Candace will tell you more about. So thanks very much, Nikki. And I think, Nikki, you're going to introduce Candace and Geert and myself.
Thanks, Viv. It's my pleasure to introduce our 3 co-hosts. Candace Kuby is the Professor of Learning, Teaching and Curriculum at the University of Missouri, where she is Department Chair and Director of Qualitative Inquiry. Dr. Kuby's research interests include the coming to be of literacies when young children work with artistic and digital tools, and approaches to and pedagogies of qualitative inquiry when thinking with post-structuralism and post-human philosophies. She's the co-author of several books, including Speculative Pedagogies of Qualitative Inquiry, Post-Humanism and Literacy Education, Knowing, Becoming, Doing Literacies, and Disrupting Qualitative Inquiry, Possibilities and Tensions in Educational Research. Her scholarship appears in journals, including Qualitative Inquiry, the International Journal of Qualitative Studies in Education, the Journal of Early Childhood Literacy, the Journal of Literacy Research, Cultural Studies and Critical Methodologies. Geert Van Hove is Professor in Disability Studies at Ghent University. His field of research is Disability Studies and Inclusive Education. Geert was the Disability Studies Professor of the Endowed Chair of Disability Studies at VUMC Amsterdam in the Department of Medical Humanities from 2013 to 2018. In 2017, Professor Van Hove was the recipient of the Stephen Taylor Memorial Senior Scholar Award at the Disability Studies in Education Conference in Minneapolis. Vivienne Bozalek is an Emerita Professor in Women and Gender Studies at the University of the Western Cape and an Honorary Professor in the Center for Higher Education, Research, Teaching and Learning at Rhodes University. She holds a PhD from Utrecht University, and her research interests include, and publications include, the political ethics of care and social justice, post-humanism and feminist new materialisms, innovative scholarly practices in higher education, and post-qualitative and participatory methodologies. Her most recent co-edited books of 2021 include Post-Human and Political Care Ethics for Reconfiguring Higher Education, Post-Anthropocentric Social Work, Critical Post-Human and New Materialist Perspectives, and Higher Education Hauntologies, Living with Ghosts for a Justice to Come. Thanks. Back to you, Candace.
Thanks so much, Nikki. So just to give an overview of the webinar today and the Zoom platform that we're using, the hosts have access to video and audio right now during the first part of the webinar. And then as we move into the question and answer section a little bit later, we will give those who are in attendance the option if they would like to unmute and also have their video on as we engage in dialogue with Tanya. So that's again an option. We will make sure that you are prompted and you can decide if you would like to move into video and audio functions during the Q&A. We also encourage you to find the button at the bottom of your screen. There's a little Q&A button. This is really helpful for myself and Nikki as we moderate the question and answer portion today. If you would like to type in a question, you can do that at any time throughout Tanya's lecture today, and we'll make sure to pull those into the Q&A toward the end of the webinar today. This helps us a little bit better than typing questions in the chat box, as sometimes questions can get lost there if other people are connecting and commenting with each other throughout. So the structure of the webinar is as follows. Tanya will share a lecture that she's prepared with some slides for the first 30 or 40 minutes. And Geert will then ask Tanya some questions pertaining to her presentation and pertaining to the 4 main questions, which is our common thread for all webinars in this series. And you can find those 4 common questions on the webinar website webpage. And then in the presentation, Tanya might share examples from her scholarship and experiences, as well as the suggested readings, which are also posted on our website. And then finally, we'll move into that Q&A portion and give you the option of joining in with audio and video, or if you prefer, just typing questions in the Q&A box. So that's sort of how we'll unfold our webinar today. And Geert's going to do an introduction of Tanya, and then we'll be turning it over so we can learn and hear from Tanya today.
So thank you, Candace. It's so good to have Dr. Titchkosky with us today. She works indeed in the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, and she positions herself in the field of disability studies. And if I'm well informed, at the moment, a lot of the focus of your work, Dr. Titchkosky, Tanya, is how university work and life are producing limited and limiting conceptions of disability and humanity, your website says. Well, I think this is very close to what this series is about, and it's about the environment we work in, the environment we live together with colleagues. Now, for myself, and I will out myself as a fan of your fan group, because since 2011, you really gave me a lot of new insights with your book titled The Question of Access. And I'm still offering this book to my students as a little gift. They have to eat and to take with them. And I'm also waiting for your new book, because there is a new book announced, and there is one sentence in that announcement that really took me, because you are promising us a relational orientation to disability studies, and I saw that you were collecting 23 chapters of different colleagues from different parts of the world, and the title is Disappearing, I think, if I'm well informed. But I'm also waiting for your presentation today, this afternoon in Europe, this morning in Toronto, because I think you gave us also part of your literature coming from the book, but also a very interesting article about metaphors and the way language plays a role in how we describe and talk about phenomena. So I won't keep people waiting for longer. It's good to have you, and I think we should start your PowerPoint presentation and give the floor to you.
Thank you. That was a very kind introduction, and I've just lost my notes. There we go. That was a very kind introduction, and I'm really excited to be here and impressed with this partnership between University of Missouri, Ghent University, and University of Western Cape. And oh, also, if we could move to slide number 3, where the questions that are to orient me today. And I appreciate these questions, which I'm hoping to answer in a narrative form. And sort of struggle through what some of these words might mean to us in different ways, if we're in different parts of the world, in different time zones, and different forms of embodiment. So how we might incorporate or be addressed by a word like neuroatypicality is something I hope to open today. So what does neuroatypicality mean for higher education? I think my presentation, which will probably be shorter than 40 minutes, will hopefully be highly responsive to that question. What does neuroatypicality mean for higher education? If I could have slide 4. Thank you. Just by way of locating myself, the people I live around, or the people whose land this is, Anishinaabe people, have taught me, well, through Maya Chikabi mostly, have taught me this word for a traditional story. And the word comes from the roots of Adisokan. So part of the roots of the word is dis or tis, meaning an umbilical connection to the source of existence. That's the D-I-Z part. And can, coming from the roots of the word of like an edifice or a mechanism to try, an artifice to try and communicate. So traditional story coming in Anishinaabe Samoan, coming from an umbilical connection to the source of existence put into a mechanism or an artifice to try and communicate that. So I don't have Anishinaabe stories to give you today, but I did think that this word might connect us to some of the ways that our existence has been sourced to us. In that sense, I'm meaning Western scientific versions of existence try to locate existence in a kind of biological or a bioeconomic version of the human, and sometimes forget about what more indigenous ways of thinking would be our relationships, how we are in relationship to each other as being the source of existence. So today I'm going to try and use this idea of traditional story, but take it to Western concepts of, if I can have slide 4, neuroatypicality and dyslexia. Take that idea of traditional story to these words and maybe try and dig out what the words are communicating to us. So if we have a device created for the purpose of connecting us to the source of existence, could neuroatypicality or could dyslexia be a device created to connecting us to a source of existence, in this case, maybe a more Western scientific or biological source of existence? I haven't typically made use of the word neuroatypicality in my work or in my research or even in my own self-understanding. And the invitation to talk today made me think about, well, why don't I use that word? Because I do identify as dyslexic. And I don't know if dyslexia is a form of neuroatypicality, or if people who identify as neuroatypical would feel united with dyslexic people. I'm not sure, but I do know, just staying with this, trying to get at the roots of words, that neuroatypicality and dyslexia share some common moves. So there's this inside part of the words with a meaning not or without, or dys, dys, as ill or bad, or with disability, apart from, dis, meaning apart from. So there's this sense, and I think it often comes to us, or those of us who experience or live with disability might experience this sense like something's wrong, or something's without typicality, or something's apart from how we understand quote, normal abilities, end quote. So and oftentimes we experience that as, well, some of us, at least me, as inside me. Like I am without a strong relationship to words or time or space sometimes. But then when you think about the other part of neuroatypicality or dyslexia, this seems to place us more in relationship to others. So typicality generated by groups of people, the typical way people do things, or lexia, meaning words or mass literacy, or the expectations that we exist in an environment of mass literacy, or even a sort of a bureaucratized relationship to reading, time, space, movement, and all those typical ways of doing reading, time, space, movement. This doesn't come from inside, I don't experience that as inside of me. I think we mostly experience that as made by groups of people, or made by society, made by a culture. So this inside-outside relationship to disability, or how disability could seem as if there is an inside-outside relationship, I think is really key to my work, or a key focus for disability studies, because we have so many ways that we are told that we are outside of the norms, or not quite doing the typical thing, or having difficulty with our words or directions or timing. And how it seems so is, I think, key for how disability studies could do disability studies. So when disability appears in our lives, it seems as if it's in my body or in my mind, my senses, my emotions, my comportment or feelings gone awry. Oh, and we're now on slide 6, please. Oh, maybe I missed slide 5. Did I miss slide 5? No, okay, thank you. So just to repeat there, because I think it's sort of key to my way of doing disability studies, and I believe some of the other people here today too. When disability appears in our lives, it seems as if it's in us, as if it's part of my or your body, mind, senses, emotions, our comportment, our feelings gone awry. But how it seems so, that disability originates in individuals and as if it's always a problem in individuals. It's that seeming, S-E-E-M-I-N-G, that seeming, which I'm captivated by. After all, individuality itself, that term individuality, including that granted to anything conceived as an individual problem, such as disability, is an unworlded activity, and it's done differently from one time and place to another. It's accomplished through cultural norms, recognized differently from one culture to the next, one group to the next. So it must be an unworlded activity, disability. Put another way, regular word usage, typical forms of comportment, ordinary ways of moving and thinking are made by groups of people, not just by the atypical or by the difficulty with words or the DIS or the DYS. All of those are done in relationship to groups of people. And disability only ever appears, or neuroatypicality only ever appears, or dyslexia only ever appears in relationship to others. And dyslexia in particular only can ever appear within cultures that expect sort of mass literacy and a bureaucratized relationship to reading the word. So one thing disability studies can give us is an attention to this making, which is also an attention to how we are made as disabled people. For me, this means attending to the interpretations and experiences of typicality and atypicality, of regular and irregular, or how disability seems. And this can help us to reveal the norms and assumptions of a culture. This way of working to reveal how disability seems could also be connected to those who take an ecological approach in critical studies, in that it's an attempt to bring out the sense of the house of our living relations. So ecological, coming from the roots of house of our living relations, that help to constitute the meaning of disability today. And it also is possible to connect this way of working to approaches in critical Indigenous studies, given the focus in critical Indigenous studies is a way to attend to all our relations, as this speaks to who we are and what we mean to each other, a way to attend to all of our relations while avoiding or without frames of cause and effect, or also without or trying to resist white supremacist notions of disability as simply, as the World Health Organization would have it, an inability to function in a way considered normal for a human being. And that's the way the World Health Organization framed it in 1981. And that's the way I believe you can find it in all sorts of literature and in reports, and in the way they even account for disability around the globe through disability adjusted life years, is this sense of a departure from a normalcy that can be measured, and that you find that in the A or the DYS or the DIS. You measure this departure from normalcy, which is then understood as a burden on the possibility of productivity and a burden on a society. So slide 6. Well, I'm not certain of the best way to describe my approach in disability studies. And while I'm not certain whether dyslexia is a form of neuroatypicality, I am certain of this. Sorry, just trying to there. There's no appearance of disability that's not simultaneously a depiction of the culture from which it springs. And Geert, that was the sense of relationality. So if there is no appearance of disability that isn't simultaneously a depiction of the culture from which it springs, then there's no perception without cultural conceptions. And that brings us into the experience of disability as steeped in relations that we could then re-encounter in new ways, or in ways that helps to reveal the culture from which the experience or the expression or the label appears. So if this holds together for you, I think one way to proceed in doing a kind of relational disability studies is to narrate experiences, or to try and tell another story, and then work back into that story to see what kind of relationships made it possible, which is what I hope to do today. I'm drawing on two people here, Thomas King, native storyteller, who wrote a book, well, many books, but the book I'm making use of is The Truth About Stories, a set of lectures. And he says, the truth about stories is that is all we are. And I'm going to try and tell a story of dyslexia experience and figure out the truth that might be in that. And then I'm also making use of Goffman, who is a sociologist some of you might know, and he talks about the interaction between disability and non-disability as a primal scene for understanding the constitution of versions of the human, and by implication, the not quite human. So he talks about interaction between disability and non-disability as a kind of primal scene. Slide 7, please. We're going to try and use a bit of a story of a dyslexic experience inside the university system as a way to reveal something of the university system, and also to try and keep with this narrative orientation that suggests that how we narrate ourselves can connect us to what's giving rise to or can source our disability experiences. Okay, so here comes a little bit of a story, which is coming from, will be published soon with Dr. Devin Healy in the Routledge International Reader for Goffman Studies. I look at the clock. I look at the people in my class. I attend to my lecture's sense of time. To that clock too. They all were clear, and I felt it. Much time had passed. I'm running out of time. The rush from the department meeting into the classroom, oh, I should say these are before pandemic times when I was in a classroom. The rush from a department meeting into the classroom, the pressing question from individual students about an upcoming assignment, as well as my on-the-spot verbal rendering of my written directions for this assignment, all of this, just before starting the class, certainly took time. I then recall the public talk some of the students said they wanted to attend. That would happen right after this class, if I could have slide 8. I checked the clock again. Too much to cover. Too much time has passed. Tick-tock. Okay, I said, I'm going to have to limit discussion time because we're almost out of time. I checked the clock again. Oh, I'm sorry. I promised you last week we would end class early today, so you had enough time to make it to the talk some of you mentioned. And now I've kept you late. Let's end here. There's a hesitation, an almost freeze frame look to the class. Even though no one else moves, I do. Quickly gathering up my notes, I leave. They look surprised. As I return to my office, I think about that strange stillness and blank stares I received from some students. Perhaps they were not that interested in going to that talk, or maybe I cut off the discussion too abruptly. That's okay, I reason. We all have lots to do. And I have another meeting. I put away my books and notes, respond to a few emails, and check the time again. Wow, the person to meet me is really late. More than an hour. So unlike them. They've never been late before. TikTok. So unlike them. So strange, and TikTok, very slowly. A different time envelops me. This time it's the time. The time that others know it floods over me, and my time, the one that had completely caught me, tangled me in a rush, now slowly falls away. My sense of time, warping all of my relations, somehow left me out of sync. Geez, I ended class more than an hour early. I phoned my partner, what time is it? I think I ended my class an hour early, but I thought I was late. You really need to pay more attention. They probably thought I was weird. I'll have to write an email apologizing to the students and tell them my dyslexia mixed me up. I ended more than an hour early, yet I told them I was sorry for keeping them late. I'm such a fool. It's the end of that little story, but I want to keep thinking about it a little bit. I'm also wondering, is it possible to put on the transcriptions for this, in case I'm hoping I'm not reading too fast, but do you have that automatic transcription service of Zoom? No.
I'll try and see while you're chatting if we do.
Okay.
I know that on
Okay.
YouTube that we'll be able to select it if they want.
Oh,
to.
they can. Okay, great. That's great.
I'll look around and try.
That, Candace, that's all I meant, was that they could select that if they wanted to. Yeah. Thanks. Everything, all situations, including classrooms, not only have their time, but also have their specific ways of doing time, of starting, moving forward, and of ending, of fulfilling regular expectations, typical ways of how time should be spent. Indeed, any version of time and space and words and order can be conceived as this interwoven relation of contexts and people and their tasks, the expectations we make up for in these contexts. It's in this situation that both are established and where time gets set as a normative phenomenon, something we can do in a typical fashion. When we become conscious of the doing of time, and I'm borrowing from Harvey Sachs there, who is an ethnomethodologist, but when we become conscious of the doing of time, when we weave together context, when the weave between context and task begins to unravel, one way to stitch it all back together again is to invoke disability. Well, dyslexia may never leave me as a way of reading the world or being in the world. It's included in this account in my own consciousness. It's included in this account as a way to stitch a reasonable sense to what otherwise would have appeared as simply weird or sloppy or foolish, or maybe even, in times of war, nothing to worry about. But still, dyslexia function that way, to stitch sense back to myself. If I could have slide 9. My invocation of dyslexia brought an understanding to the fore, setting the stage for me to become, and these are Goffman's words, situation conscious. While the normals present are spontaneously involved within the situation. End of the quotation from Goffman. So he's suggesting we become situation conscious, while those who remain normal don't have that consciousness. They just sort of do the situation. Goffman goes on to suggest that some people gain a special aliveness to what otherwise remains a background of unattended matters. My inclusion of dyslexia is simultaneously my connection to a special aliveness, which is often a jolt, regarding the social ordering of the doing of time. I realize I'm out of time sort of after it's already happened. And it's like a jolt. And it makes me ride the edges of the normal perspective where time might remain in the unattended background, A dyslexic person might be especially attentive to the notion that time is moving, that it must be kept, and despite one's best efforts, there can be a flash of recognition of a failure to keep time, which becomes a matter that is startling and unnerving. So I'm always sort of on guard that I might be losing time, and I try to keep track of time, but sometimes it catches me, and the jolt, I realize I'm in some other time than everybody else. Ending class early, yet announcing that I'm out of time, the class might find me weird. Or you might say the word module. In Canada, we say class. The class might find me weird. I, however, find dyslexia, as well as my self-stigmatizing sense that I'm foolish, whereas my partner, who I called, finds me inattentive. It is, however, the disability designation and not weird, foolish, or inattentive that I include in the email that I send to the students after class. My apology email offers the students a way to make sense of the time mix-up, but says nothing about the special aliveness of doing time. And I'm a disability studies scholar, and I don't give anything of that special aliveness of doing time. I just give the apology through the term, my dyslexia messed me up. Saying that I'm late while ending the class a full hour early is a wrinkle in time flattened by my self-stigmatizing process. It's not that the degradation disappears, though. The designation weird remains. So does my sentiment foolish. But whether weird or foolish or inattentive, and despite the invocation of specific understandings of wrinkles in time, it's only dyslexia that I include as a sense-making device. A disability is made to serve as the explanatory device to conceptually manage the situation. In the end, I explain myself via an email, which features my dyslexia, and offered little else, except now today I'm hoping to put us all into relationship to this and offer something other than an apology, to offer a sense that time is being done, that our relationships are being done through these disability terms. And these disability terms might give us access to how we perceive both normalcy and non-normalcy, or typicality and atypicality. So this up close and personal feel for the way dyslexia lives in my life is integrated into a classroom as well as into an email, and is quite unlike the way disability is addressed by university accommodation procedures, which, as far as I can tell, are a lot the same around the world, or those influenced by English or that have been colonized. There's an objectifying measure for accommodation procedures where you need to, you're told that you're welcome in the classroom, but that if you need any help, that you should go elsewhere, go to the accommodation office. As far as I've been able to discern, there is, we welcome disabled students into our classrooms in the higher education, but if you're having difficulties, please identify, please have your difficulties measured by an educational specialist or by a doctor. Go to another office where accommodation procedures may or may not be granted to you as you re-enter the classroom. So there's this kind of objectification of disability that is offered by most educational bureaucracies. And that's one of the primary ways we construct disability in the university environment, sort of noting the impaired functionality and suggesting accommodation procedures are on offer. And many of us have had the experience, well, they're not really on offer, but still there's this objectification. I think the point I'm trying to make there is between my subjective experience of disability and the objectification that comes through a bureaucracy are a set of relations that we are yet to explore, that are making up the meaning of people and making up the meaning of not people, or who doesn't count as quite human. And let's see, could we have slide? How much time has gone by, Geert, please?
It's now 1/4 past the hour.
Okay, so I should probably end soon. Is that right?
you can still go on for it's the way you talk, Tanya, is taking us into a certain atmosphere. So I think it would be stupid to stop you. I don't know how many slides you want to discuss more, but perhaps, is it okay for you to have 10 to 15 minutes?
Okay, I'm going to do 2 more slides then.
Yeah.
If I could have slide 10. Okay, this in Ontario is the way universities are attempting to accommodate disability into the university environment. And this is a boilerplate, which they are recommending to all of the universities, colleges, as a way to officially mark the necessity of accommodation on course outlines or syllabi, that students would receive this, and then the rest that follows from this accommodation boilerplate would be implemented in all the universities in Ontario, Canada. And it reads, the university provides academic accommodations for students with disabilities in accordance with a legal document. This occurs through a collaborative process that acknowledges a collective obligation to develop an accessible learning environment that both meets the needs of students and preserves the essential academic requirements of the university's courses and programs. And then third move, if you have a question about accommodations, contact a counselor or contact accessibility services, contact somebody outside of the classroom is the point I'm trying to make there. It's just so fascinating that just like my story of dyslexia as putting me into relationships to the normative order of time, here we have a boilerplate for accommodation that first of all puts a student maybe in relationship to a myth, but a legal myth, that the university provides accommodations in relationship to the Human Rights Code. That may or may not be true, and they may or, service providers may or may not know anything about the Human Rights Code, even though you might use the Human Rights Code to get them to give you access to your right to accommodation. And then the second sentence says this occurs through a collaborative process. Now the law and the myth of complete accommodation sort of goes away, and we have a negotiation between an accessible learning environment that meets the needs and essential academic requirements. So there's some sort of, now the student is asked to understand yourself and your needs as somehow sort of different from the essential academic requirements of university courses and programs. And that difference should launch you to go find accessibility services. I'm not exactly critiquing it. I'm just saying, is it not interesting how every articulation of disability, every experience of disability, or all the words for disability put us into relationships that we might not yet be examining. But even though we don't examine those relationships, they propel us into like labels that we can call ourselves, or experiences in classroom disruptions that I can take on as my own, or boilerplate negotiations for how we are in the classroom together. So if I could have the next slide. This is Sylvia Winter coming from Black Studies, who says, look, and she's saying of all the studies that arose in like from the 1960s on, Islamic studies, Black studies, religious studies, war studies, women's studies, and I think, eventually disability studies. And she says, of all these studies, she says, look back at all the studies that were called for, all the studies that have come up. Each is saying, look at how I've been negatively represented. And then she says, suppose we ask, what are the rules that govern those representations and why? Then you begin. And so I find her work in Black studies to be particularly provocative in that she's saying, yes, there are negative depictions. In fact, she talks about how Black people and a sense of non-humanity have been interlaced in an article called No Humans Involved, which details how Black people are killed by police officers and police officers saying no humans involved. This is part of the Watts riots that she was talking about back in, I think that's the 70s or 80s. I'm sorry, I don't have the time. But she nonetheless says, look back at all the studies that were called for, all the studies that have come up. Each is saying, look at how we've been negatively represented. Suppose we ask, what are the rules governing those representations and why? Then you begin. What are the rules governing our identification of disability? Who is served by those identifications of disability? What sort of relationship do our representations of disability bring us to, and why? And then you begin. So now I'll have the slide that has the book cover, please. That's, I think, the next slide. Yes. Thanks for the chance to think through or try to express what proceeding in a relational way with the word disability, dyslexia, or neuroatypicality what sort of relationships it might bring us into. And you've really opened that question up for me. I hope I can keep that question alive. And I also would like to tell you about the new book that's coming out probably in June called Disappearing Encounters in Disability Studies. And most of the authors in this book, in poetry, in blog, in essays, are trying to look at what sort of relationships appear when disability appears. And then when disability makes that appearance, what has been made to disappear? So it's not just that disability is ignored, it's even when we pay attention to disability, we make some things disappear. For example, we can make our relationships disappear when we understand disability is just biological. And this book is trying to always keep the dialectic going between appearance and disappearance, and as a way to release the meaning of disability. And there's a lot of great chapters in it, and I hope you get a chance to look at it. And that's where I'd like to end.
Thank you, dear colleague. This is quite a story. You have been taking us by analyzing words, terminology. You have been taking us to the environment of education, higher education, but not only from the perspective of students, but also from the perspective of a professor who is struggling with time and is doing things with time and is reinventing her relationship with students because she has to survive a certain period you got in a scheme from your dean or whatever bureaucrats that are around to help you to get your scheme of lessons, and your that was also incredible. You are also bringing us again and again back to the idea that disability studies and cultural studies and studies have a certain have certain basics that are popping up again and again, and we have to learn from each other and to think in that way and to look across the walls and to learn to understand each other's language. And you are bringing in yourself that question again, that you don't know if dyslexia can be seen as something neuroatypical. And I really like this question, because by using time as one of the focuses you were going for, I think you were opening up your reality and your experiences to experiences of other colleagues who are running around, getting to their next heart attack, or who are nervous because they have to read that many papers, and the word deadline is, I think, more and more a problem for everybody in higher education. And you were talking about relationships, and negotiating, and do we apologize? What do we do when we bring in all kind of topics? So I'm really so happy that we could listen to you. I'm really excited to see that book somewhere June. If you can talk to the editor or to the publisher, you can tell her or him that it can also be April or May. They don't have to wait till June to give us the book. And I think by bringing in winter, you also come close to the fourth question we always put on our list of questions, is the idea of what is the intersection with post-colonial and decolonial debates, if we start from the idea of neuroatypicality. So I think you were really covering the four questions most of the time we use as a frame. I think you did more than that. So in one or another way, if you look back at our last 30 minutes, do you have yourself an answer on your question? Is dyslexia, can it be seen as a neuroatypical phenomenon? And it's not a quiz question, and I don't have a prize. I would like to offer you a bottle of wine for a good answer, but
red, please.
Yeah,
Red wine.
red wine. Okay.
Okay. Well, I think the words invite a sense of relationship, but they're reversed. So neuroatypicality and dyslexia. So dyslexia starts with the sense of a problem and with words, lexia. But neuro starts with a sense of neurological, and I pointed to my head, but who knows where those are. And then atypicality, which I came to appreciate, and trying to ask myself that question, I came to appreciate the word more because it puts you into relationship with typicality. It says already, whatever's going on here, it's in relationship to the dominant order. Dyslexia seems a bit more, the word seems a little bit more caught up in a sense of biological lack. But maybe they should share some, the sense that they are both moving between an experience and cultural relations, typicality. Maybe they should be friends.
I'm
do
so
other
happy.
people think?
Yeah, I don't know what other people are thinking. I see that somebody is raising his or her hand. Viv, it's you, I think.
Yes, thanks. Thanks very much for that wonderful talk, Tanya. I was so happy to see that you were actually addressing the questions, and so grateful that you took them seriously. I was wondering if you had come across Erin Manning's work, because that is where we came across this notion of neurotypicality. And she sort of makes it quite clear that this is not located in an individual, but that it could be sort of construed as a form of, which is akin to cultural racism or institutional racism. So she also refers to Guattari's concept of normopathy, which I think is quite nice, because it's making, normality a pathology, actually. So, that's just, and I think she most often talks about it in relation to autism. But, why we also asked about how could one value other sorts of knowledges, sort of neuroatypical knowledges, is what I would like to ask you, because I'm particularly interested in that. In higher education, I mean, your experience of time, as Geert was saying, is sort of indicative of the, the extreme conditions under which we work. And I mean, it's impossible to deal with anything in depth in the sort of period of an hour. You certainly can't do anything meaningful. So, we have all these bureaucratic restrictions placed on us, but how could we learn from neuroatypicality, both in the way we do teaching or the way we do research or scholarship, and also in terms of the content?
Other people probably have ideas about this, but I do think we'd have to continue to tell narratives, try to actually narrate the phenomenon of the experience of being out of sync or out of time or out of place or out of a sense of ordinary, but narrating those, not so as to prove the identity category, so not so as to just be qualified in order to receive, say, accommodative measures, but instead to work backwards into, like, how did I even get into this wild experience of not fitting, of not understanding, of losing time, of losing space, of not knowing what to do in the face of my colleagues or of other students. So it's almost like working backwards into the narrative instead of, I believe, instead of using our narratives as a diagnostic measure to acquire resources in order to be made to fit, to even using the diagnostic paradigm, like, how do I tell that I am such and such? So you could even use that, but then to move backwards instead of forwards. Like, how do I move into that story? Like, what allowed me to identify that this is a moment of, say, dyslexia, and the other parts of the story are not? Or, at what situation do I feel my difference, and and how do I narrate that? That's like a backwards movement that has to happen. And it's a little bit away from the moving into diagnostic, objectifying measures that do secure a label, and they do secure sometimes, occasionally, resources. But those are so that we don't, it seems like, so we don't think about the actual experience that has been composed in relationship to others. So how could we narrate as a relation? How could we narrate as a relation? Because we do narrate, but as a relationship to medicine and science and the bureaucracy, typically.
I wonder if this is a good time to invite others into questions and dialogue. Does that seem all right? So I think if we're going to maybe pivot to more open space for questions and answers with Tanya, myself and Nikki can invite each of our attendees if they want to be promoted to a panelist, which gives them audio and video function, or at least audio, I believe, and if they want to voice questions to Tanya. And also we have our Q&A button on the screen if you want to click on that and then type a question there. One of us will make sure to try to include it and voice that for Tanya as well. So yeah, we'll go ahead and kind of shift into this space. Geert, you might have something else that you want to add or follow up on as people kind of make their choices or decide if they have a question they want to type, etc.
Yeah. I want to follow up, Tanya, about we have to narrate. That's one of your main topics. If I am taking the position as a researcher, do I have to follow certain methodologies to narrate? Are we related? Do we relate to a certain school of narrative studies? Or because you were talking about blogs and emails and vlogs, and I think you were giving us a little detail within your story. Are you going in that new book? Are you going completely wild? Is everything there, or is there a kind of idea you can offer us to survive? And I'm not asking it just by coincidence, but because one of my PhD students got a review of a very stupid journal that was saying that WhatsApp messages between parents and teachers could never be seen as data.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but we were going now for a better journal. But just to make sure we understand you well, we have to.
Yeah, I'm relying on I guess phenomenology, and Maurice Merleau-Ponty in particular, in the beginning of Phenomenology of Perception, and he says something like, every word is a gesture, its whole meaning points at the world. No, its meaning points at the whole world. I might have the word whole in the wrong place. So every word is a gesture, its meaning points at a whole world. And I think, to me, that means something like every utterance, including the WhatsApp or the poem or the blog or the Zoom meeting, every utterance gestures towards a set of meanings that come not from the utterance, not from the single WhatsApp app, but from this whole world. So the world of technology, the world of communication, the world of parents needing to talk to children. And I think we need to treat that seriously, that our utterances are where it's at. Like, that's how we are making each other's mean. And I know it's also like WhatsApp is a powerful corporation. It's part of an electronic universe that has many control mechanisms in it, and capitalism, that's all there too. But as well as those words are what? Ensconced in that artifice. And that artifice is part of how we make each other meaningful. So I do think if every word is a gesture and it gestures towards the world, then we could use the sentence or the gesture too. I also need to think about like nonverbal ways of being with each other. Those gestures are right for us to get into relationship to the world that made them possible. I think.
I will tell this to my student who could not be here, but perhaps she will watch the video afterwards. It will help her as an extra. Okay, are there any questions in the chat or in the Q&A box? Not yet.
I see one that just came in, so I'll read that out loud. It says, Tanya, can you elaborate a bit more about doing time?
I borrowed doing time. I mean, that's a common phraseology that can be used in a lot of different ways. But if time is not a thing, but an activity, and that notion that the time is an activity that's socially organized, I'm borrowing that from Harvey Sachs, who was an ethnomethodologist. And ethnomethodologists are people who study like the ways people do what they do in order to make a sensible world. So the doing of time is a complicated social process that makes you often without, if you don't struggle with the doing of time, you might not know this, but the doing of time makes you pay attention to the context, to other people. The time is an activity. It's not just something that happens and it's not given by God. Maybe your time personally might be given by God, but the doing of daily time is socially organized, so that we have like the beginning, middle, and end of a novel, a classroom, or a Zoom meeting are all done differently. And there's a whole bunch of social expectations for how to, like recipes for how you do time normally. And we could study that. And, you know, disability time, which lots of people have talked about, the Disability Studies Quarterly online open access journal has many times where it has done disability time, overtime. See all those different uses of time. They're all like doing of time, but I'd love to know from the questioner if doing time, like what part of doing time sort of captivated you there to ask the question.
I think it was Jentel who was asking the question. Jentel, are you there? Jentel?
Yes, now I find the correct buttons. I'm here. Yeah, you were explaining how you experienced time in your story, and I was curious about this explanation about doing time as a concept, as an activity. So you explained it for me very well.
Okay, great. I just put into chat that I was using Harvey Sachs. Oh, that might have an S on it, and ethnomethodology to talk a little bit about the doing of time as a very specific, culturally organized, group constrained action. It gets me so nervous. I must have talked to Geert about 10 emails. Are you sure? What time are we going to show up? Because I'm already so uneasy with my ability to read the doing of time.
And it is so good that you did not know that we were thinking about the time that is changing in certain countries at that moment. I thought we won't go into that discussion with you. We will keep it as it is to keep you into your comfort zone. Nikki.
Thank you.
Thanks, Geert. Tammy's actually sitting with me, and Tammy has a question to ask.
Hi, I'm Tammy Scheffer. Thanks so much for your talk. I really, really valued it. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what narrative relationality might mean, what relational narratives might mean. How do you see narrative, and how do we avoid, because narratives also are shaped, our notions of narrative are shaped by normative orthodoxies around what narratives count. So how does one avoid or disrupt that kind of normativity in, you know, centering and working with relational narratives? Thanks. If that makes sense.
Thank you. I think that's a really good question. Maybe it's two questions. How to disrupt the normative demands that are already organizing narrative. And then I think relatedly, how could we orient narrative to reveal its normative demands, which I think is a disruption. My partner and colleague, Ron McKelko, says, I think it's in a book called The Mystery of the Eye and the Shadow of Blindness. One of the least normal things we can do is think about normalcy. Yeah, I think that's how he says it. One of the least normal things we can do is think about normalcy. And narratives are always controlled by the world with it, the situation within which they are uttered. Like what we were saying about the WhatsApp dialogue, or a narrative in a novel and the editors and the need to sell the book, or the narratives when we go from the classroom and I tell students one thing in the email and I tell my partner another thing on the telephone. Like the telephone helps to organize and normatively control what and how things are said, or if things can be said, as does the email going back to my students in my classroom. So all those structural, organizational, normative demands are part of each and every story. And I don't think they are, I don't think there's an escape hatch, or maybe there is no exit. If there's no exit, then it's what relationship do we have to that which organizes our narratives? And I think the first thing would be like, try to know that we're making a decision about what's organizing narratives, and try to use the stories that we tell to not only reveal something outwards, but reveal something of what's organizing it, a kind of that in-out relationship that I tried to do with dyslexia or neuroatypicality. Like, what is it saying is subjective? What is it saying is objective? Who gets to tell the objective story? Who gets to tell the subjective story? And then, again, relying on phenomenology, it says, the great gift of phenomenology, or what it would like to give all people, is a sense that the radical objectivity and radical subjectivity are false, that they are always in relationship to each other. Could we try to bring, like when science says, or a diagnostic says, can we try to bring back the subjectivity? When we have the subjective experience, when I say, this is what dyslexia is, I feel it this way, I got it. Can I try to bring back how it's objectively narrated in the world in other ways by other people, and it isn't just up to I, the knower. So to try and keep in relation, bring the tension of the relationship between objective and subjective, to hold that as we re-narrate. But that narrative too is stuck, isn't it? In academia, in the papers, or in the conversation right now, we're still stuck. I forget who wrote the book, Living in a State of Stuck. I think it might be about sports, but sometimes I think like language in academia is that living in a state of stuck. And how could we know that and work with it? What do you think?
Thank you. Thanks.
Tammy's saying not today.
But thank you for that wonderful response. Thank you.
I think Viv, are you back? You were frozen. You said you had a question.
Yeah. I don't know if Tanya will be able to hear this. It did freeze, and I was kicked out a little bit with the last question. But I want to go back to Erin Manning, as you.
Oops.
Oh, this is gone.
There you are.
Oh.
Sorry.
What I heard was going back to Erin Manning, who I need to read.
I was just thinking of, you need to
read.
Viv, I wonder if you shouldn't switch off your camera, and then we'll just listen to your voice. Let's see if that works.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay, so I was wondering about the notion of Black sociality. You know, and I don't know if you're familiar with Moten and Harney's work, because, you know, what Manning said in the reading, Moten read her the Minor Gesture book and said,
Moten read the Manning Gesture book and said, and that's all I heard. I
can
try and
continue. I think I can continue what I think Viv was
Okay.
going to say is when he reviewed the manuscript, The Minor Gesture, he came back with a comment that said all Black life is neurodiverse life. So I think that was what Viv was building up to with regards to Black sociality. Not quite sure exactly what her question was going to be or her comment, but have you read the Undercommons? Viv's back. Viv's back.
No, you've got it right, Nikki. That's fine.
Good.
Just like Tanya, to hear what Tanya had to say.
Okay.
I think I have a big yes going right now, but probably through the work of Fanon. Black sociality and Gilroy, the work of Gilroy as well. The sense of where and what is meant by Blackness, how it's come to function, and the theorizing of what Blackness means and who it has served, and the history of the genesis of the term has so much to do with how, and that's where Sylvia Wynter takes us to, with a conception of human that is incredibly limited and has not taken into the genesis of the term of Blackness as produced through white supremacy, colonialism, has produced a conception of human that's highly limited. So some people have tried to move into like a post-humanism, but I think Sylvia Wynter doesn't move that direction. Instead tries to say, could we disrupt the representations of capital M man as if this is the human itself? And I think disability studies and some forms of Black studies and some forms of phenomenology are trying to do that, disrupt the conception of man with a big, I'm drawing a big giant M, as if that's the human itself. So we have man as a economic, white, able category, treated as if it's not just a norm, but the real. And then everyone else is evaluated as lesser than from there. And Fanon definitely talks about that. And I'm sorry to go, like, I'm not as cool as all of you are. But if we go back to Fanon, I think he is saying that. And I think a lot of people have been saying that for a long time. What have we done with our conception of human such that it excludes so many, that it can be used to kill so many and make so many derogatory cutoff points? And how have we convinced ourselves, especially through bureaucracy that relies on capital M man for its own functionality, how do we convince ourselves that, like, this is the best way to be? And that if we don't have bureaucracy on our side, we have nothing, at least in the university. So I need to read Manning, and I will. I'm going to hear a lecture by Moten soon. But I think these are some issues that have been with us since the time of Black studies, started in the 50s, 40s.
I don't see another hand raised or question, but there is a thank you perhaps in the chat that you might want to see from Lenny. Tanya, if you just want to take a moment to see that, it was a thank you and Lenny had to slip out. I think we're getting close to the end of our time. So I guess if there are any final questions, anybody else that wanted to voice a question or type one in the Q&A box, we're happy to share those with Tanya before we wrap up.
Just to say thank you, Tanya. I have to switch to mute because I'm in a very noisy environment, but I really enjoyed your presentation and I'm very glad we're going to have those slides to return to, because I think there was a lot you were talking to and bringing together, and I'm going to have to do some homework with it. Yeah, but thank you.
Me too. Your questions, the questions have been so generative and provocative, and I also love that keeping questions alive as questions, and I really appreciate this time together today to do that.
So it was
Yeah, I also
so.
want, yeah.
Please go. No, go.
I just wanted to also say thank you so much. And what really resonated with me was your Goffman quote, because it just is so apt, I think, that one becomes conscious of these things, you know, feeling different. And I think that for me, you know, was the highlight. I loved that. So thank you so much for all the preparation you did too. It was wonderful.
My pleasure.
I was trying to sing the same song because I was noting Goffman 1963.
Mm-hmm.
So if we would ask students to read Goffman 1963, they would look at us like, did he ever wrote an article in a highly cited journal? So I'm so happy that you are digging the jewels of 1963 for us, and that you are bringing it in. I agree with Viv in a very in a way we can work with it, and we can go with it, we can take it with us. I really like the idea that but I think you were trained as a sociologist in your basic training. Yeah.
An interpretive sociologist.
Yeah. So we need those interpretive sociologists to help us, to bring us back to Goffman. So I'm really thankful for that too. And I'm also really thankful that you remind us about the definition of the World Health Organization, because we see that a lot of our colleagues who are working in other continents and who are working through NGOs are really forced to think in that again and again biomedical way of thinking about functioning. The whole ICF, I won't use the word bullshit, but the whole ICF way of thinking about ability, inability, functioning, and then something they could not define, and that was participation. That was the only thing they were not able to bring on the table. So I'm really thankful that you also brought this definition back on the table. Thank you for that.
And thanks for the reminder about participation. That can't be defined. But if we started there instead of ended there, I wonder what would happen.
Yeah. Thinking backwards, that was your slogan. That was not a slogan, I think. There is still, Nikki, are you raising a hand there? Or?
I think just to say there's another comment from Francois who says, thank you, Tanya. You're definitely very cool.
Okay, if I am, then I suggest we do go back and read the people who were writing at the time of World War II, and maybe our sense that we've arrived at a different time is incorrect, and we can really revolutionize this thing called being together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. So I'll just echo, it's been just such a delight to learn and listen with you today, especially in the discussion of narratives. I found really fascinating in how we come to be in the world through the narratives, and just also disrupting that notion of normative narrative. There's so much here to go back and listen to and think about. So thank you, as others have shared, for your time today, what you prepared for us to think about, and the examples that you shared from your own life. We really appreciate that vulnerability and generosity to be a part of the webinar series. A few things to share before we close today for everyone. Thanks for all who joined us today, who are going to watch this on YouTube later. We're glad that you found it. As we stated before, it's recorded, and so once we get it downloaded and Nikki gets it ready, it will be up on our YouTube channel. As a reminder, our next webinar is on April the 21st, and Karen Lazar and Denise Newfield will be joining us. And so please check the webinar website, because I believe that European Standard Time, there's a shift in time zone. So I believe that it will be 4:30 for the European standard as well as Cape Town, which is not the case today. So please always check the website. The Zoom link is also on our website. There is a different Zoom link for every webinar session in the series. So be sure that you go to the website and click on that one instead of looking, old emails will have a different link that might not work for that particular day. There's also suggested readings on the website, so you can stay tuned and look out for those from Karen and Denise if you'd like to read those ahead of time or even after the webinar. And thank you, Nikki, for all your help in getting the logistics going and the video up on YouTube. Thanks for all who joined us today. Any last closing thoughts by Tanya or anybody else today before we sign off is definitely welcome.
Tanya is cool. Let's end with this very nice Francois expression. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Come on.
Stay safe.